Sometimes the most dangerous person in a courtroom isn't the one wearing a black robe. When Judge Thornfield forced Emma Rodriguez to defend herself, thinking she was just another helpless victim, he had no idea he was about to face his worst nightmare, a woman who knew the law better than he did. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile courtroom as Emma Rodriguez adjusted her navy blue knitted sweater nervously. Her shoulder-length brown hair framed a face that carried both determination and uncertainty. She'd never imagined she'd be sitting here, facing charges that seemed to come out of nowhere. "Ms. Rodriguez," Judge Robert Thornfield's voice boomed from the bench, his gray hair perfectly styled, his demeanor radiating authority. "You understand you're facing serious allegations of financial misconduct?" Emma's hands trembled slightly as she clutched a manila folder. "Yes, Your Honor, but I don't understand how—" "Understanding isn't required," Thornfield interrupted, his eyes cold. "Compliance is. Now, where's your attorney?" I couldn't afford one, Your Honor. I requested a public defender, but apparently none are available." Thornfield's smirk was barely concealed. "How unfortunate. Well then, you'll have to represent yourself. This court doesn't wait for anyone's convenience." Emma felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her from the gallery behind. Reporters, courthouse regulars, and curious onlookers had gathered for what promised to be a spectacle. A simple woman drowning in legal proceedings she couldn't possibly understand. The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed man in his 50s, stood confidently. "Your Honor, the state is ready to proceed. Ms. Rodriguez allegedly embezzled over $50,000 from the community center where she volunteered as a bookkeeper." "Allegedly?" Emma's voice cracked. "Your Honor, I never took a penny. I've dedicated 3 years of my life to that center, helping families in need." "Save it for your defense," Thornfield waved dismissively. "If you can mount one." Emma noticed something peculiar in the judge's tone, a hint of satisfaction, as if he was enjoying her discomfort. She'd always been observant, a trait that had served her well in her previous life, the life she'd tried so hard to leave behind. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I'd like to request a brief recess to review the charges more thoroughly." Thornfield's eyebrows raised mockingly. "Ms. Rodriguez, this isn't a library. You've had weeks to prepare. The prosecution will present their case, and then you'll stumble through whatever defense you think might work." The gallery chuckled at his words, but Emma caught something else, a quick glance between Thornfield and the prosecutor. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it spoke volumes to someone trained to read such signals. "I understand, Your Honor, but procedural law clearly states—" "Clearly states what?" Thornfield leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. Emma hesitated. She'd almost said too much, almost revealed knowledge that a simple volunteer bookkeeper shouldn't possess. I just think I deserve the same considerations as any defendant." "You'll get exactly what you deserve," Thornfield said ominously. "Nothing more, nothing less. Prosecutor, call your first witness." As the morning progressed, Emma watched the systematic destruction of her character unfold. Witness after witness took the stand, painting her as a desperate woman who'd stolen from those she claimed to help. The evidence seemed overwhelming: forged documents, suspicious transactions, even a fake confession letter allegedly in her handwriting. But Emma noticed inconsistencies, dates that didn't align, signatures that varied slightly, bank records that seemed too convenient. Her trained eye caught details that others missed, details that suggested something far more sinister than simple embezzlement. During a brief break, she overheard the prosecutor whispering to his assistant, "Thornfield wants this wrapped up quickly, no complications." Emma's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about her. This was orchestrated. But why? What had she stumbled into? And more importantly, how much of her real identity could she reveal without exposing the very secrets she'd spent years hiding? The afternoon session would test everything she thought she knew about justice, truth, and survival. The afternoon session began with devastating testimony from Marcus Webb, the community center's director. His nervous fidgeting and inability to meet Emma's eyes told her everything she needed to know, but she had to be careful about how she handled this. "Mr. Webb," the prosecutor began smoothly, "how long have you known the defendant?" About 3 years. Emma started volunteering when we desperately needed help with our books. And did you notice any irregularities during her time there? Webb's voice cracked. Not at first. She seemed so helpful, dedicated. But then families started complaining about missing donations. That's when we discovered the discrepancies. Emma's jaw tightened. She'd helped Webb secure that position when the previous director had been fired for incompetence. The betrayal cut deep, but she forced herself to focus on the legal implications. Mr. Webb, she stood when her turn came, her voice steadier than she felt. You mentioned families complaining about missing donations. Can you provide specific dates and amounts? Webb shifted uncomfortably. Well, the paperwork is all there in the evidence. That's not what I asked. Emma's tone carried a subtle authority that made several people in the gallery sit up straighter. I asked for your personal knowledge of these complaints. When did families approach you directly? I don't recall the exact. You don't recall, or they never actually approached you? Judge Thornfield slammed his gavel. Ms. Rodriguez, this isn't a television drama. Ask proper questions or sit down. Emma noticed how quickly Thornfield had intervened. Too quickly. Your Honor, I believe I have the right to cross-examine witnesses effectively. You have the right to make a fool of yourself, which you're doing admirably. The gallery's laughter stung, but Emma pressed on. Mr. Webb, who handles the center's banking besides myself? Well, I do, and our treasurer, Patricia, and... Webb's voice trailed off. And who else? Sometimes board members help with special projects. Emma felt her pulse quicken. Including Judge Thornfield's wife, Mrs. Thornfield? The courtroom fell silent. Thornfield's face darkened dangerously. Ms. Rodriguez, you will not drag irrelevant parties into this proceeding. Your Honor, if Mrs. Thornfield had access to the accounts, surely that's relevant to... Another word about my family, and I'll hold you in contempt. Thornfield's threat was clear, but Emma caught something else, fear flickering behind his anger. The prosecutor quickly called his next witness, a bank manager who testified about suspicious withdrawals. But as Emma listened, she began connecting dots that painted a different picture entirely. Mr. Johnson, she addressed the bank manager during cross-examination. These withdrawals you've identified, they all occurred on Wednesdays, correct? Yes, that appears to be the pattern. And I was only at the center on Mondays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, wasn't I? Johnson checked his records. According to the volunteer schedule, yes. So, these transactions happened on days when I wasn't even present? Thornfield intervened again. Speculation. The defendant could have conducted business remotely. Emma turned to face him directly. Your Honor, with respect, the bank requires physical presence for withdrawals of this size. Mr. Johnson, isn't that correct? Yes, our policy requires... That's enough, Thornfield snapped. The court will take a 15-minute recess. As people filed out, Emma noticed the prosecutor huddling urgently with Thornfield in the hushed tones. She caught fragments. Too many questions. Knows more than she should. Handle this quickly. Emma's worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't just corruption, it was a cover-up. And somehow, her volunteer work at the community center had made her a threat to something much bigger. But what exactly had she seen or learned that warranted this elaborate frame-up? She thought back to those quiet Wednesday evenings when she'd stayed late, organizing files and updating records, the strange visits from well-dressed individuals who met with board members, the cash donations that seemed unusually large for a small community center. The pieces were forming a picture she didn't like. And now she faced an impossible choice. Reveal her true legal expertise and risk exposing her hidden past, or watch herself be railroaded by a corrupt system. The next session would force her hand. When court resumed, Emma noticed increased tension in the room. Additional security had been posted, and she caught Thornfield whispering urgently into his phone before taking the bench. The prosecution calls Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, the prosecutor announced. Emma's former colleague at the community center walked to the witness stand with obvious reluctance. Patricia had been like a mother to Emma, teaching her the center's filing system and sharing stories of the families they helped. Now she avoided Emma's gaze entirely. Mrs. Hendricks, the prosecutor began, you work closely with the defendant. Did you ever witness suspicious behavior? Patricia's voice was barely audible. I saw Emma staying late, very late, sometimes past midnight. And what was she doing during these late hours? Working with the computer, the financial files. Patricia's hands shook as she spoke. Emma felt her heart breaking. Patricia was clearly being coerced, but proving it would require revealing skills she'd sworn never to use again. Mrs. Hendricks? Emma stood for cross-examination, her voice gentle but probing. During these late nights you mentioned, did you ever actually see me accessing financial files? Yes, I think so. You think so, or you know so. Patricia's eyes finally met Emma's, and in them was a plea for understanding. I saw you at the computer. But you couldn't see the screen from your position at the filing cabinets, could you? No, but, in fact, those late nights I was there, I was researching grant opportunities and updating our volunteer database, wasn't I? Patricia nodded reluctantly. Yes, you were always trying to help us get more funding. Emma felt the momentum shifting slightly. Mrs. Hendricks, has anyone threatened you or your family in connection with this testimony? Thornfield exploded. Objection! That's completely inappropriate. Your Honor, Emma's voice carried newfound confidence. In pro-SC representation, I have the right to explore witness bias under Federal Rule of Evidence 6. She stopped herself mid-sentence. She'd almost cited specific federal rules, knowledge that would immediately raise questions about her background. Thornfield's eyes narrowed dangerously. What were you about to say, Ms. Rodriguez? I just think witnesses shouldn't be pressured. But the damage was done. Emma had revealed too much legal knowledge, and everyone in the courtroom had noticed. The prosecutor called his final witness, a handwriting expert who claimed the forged confession letter was definitely written by Emma. But as the expert testified, Emma studied the document projector screen with the intensity of someone who understood forensic analysis. Mr. Peterson, she began her cross-examination, you stated that handwriting analysis is your specialty. How many years of experience do you have? 15 years. And you're familiar with the American Board of Forensic Document Examiners certification requirements? Peterson looked surprised. Yes, of course. Could you remind the court of their standards regarding exemplar samples? Well, they require multiple authentic samples for comparison. How many authentic samples of my handwriting did you analyze before reaching your conclusion? Peterson shuffled his papers nervously. The prosecution provided adequate samples. That's not what I asked. How many verified authentic samples? 2. Emma's voice grew stronger. And the ABFDE requires a minimum of how many samples for reliable analysis? 5 to 7, depending on the complexity. So your analysis falls below professional standards? Thornfield banged his gavel furiously. Ms. Rodriguez, where exactly did you learn about forensic document examination? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Emma realized she'd pushed too far, revealed too much. The courtroom was dead silent, everyone waiting for her answer. I researched it online, Your Honor. When you're facing charges, you learn quickly. But Thornfield wasn't buying it. His expression had shifted from contempt to suspicion. Bailiff, I want Ms. Rodriguez's background thoroughly checked during tonight's recess. Tomorrow morning, we're going to have some very interesting discussions. As the court adjourned, Emma felt the walls closing in. Her carefully constructed new identity was crumbling, and tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The real battle was just beginning. The next morning, Emma entered the courtroom to find Thornfield studying a thick file with obvious displeasure. Their eyes met across the room, and she saw something new in his gaze: wariness. Ms. Rodriguez, Thornfield began without preamble, it seems your background check revealed some interesting gaps, large gaps. Care to explain your whereabouts between 2015 and 2018? Emma's carefully rehearsed response died in her throat. Those were the years she'd tried desperately to forget. Her time as a prosecutor specializing in corruption cases before everything went wrong. Your Honor, I don't see how my employment history relates to these charges. Don't you? Thornfield leaned forward menacingly. Because I'm beginning to think there's more to you than meets the eye. The prosecutor stood nervously. Your Honor, perhaps we should focus on the case at hand? Emma caught the subtle exchange between them. The prosecutor seemed uncomfortable with this new direction. Interesting. Actually, Emma said, surprising everyone including herself, I think the court deserves the truth about my background. The gallery stirred with anticipation. Thornfield's knuckles whitened as he gripped his gavel. From 2015 to 2018, I worked as a prosecutor. Specifically, I specialized in white-collar crime and judicial corruption cases. The courtroom erupted. Thornfield banged his gavel repeatedly, his face flushed with anger and something else, fear. I resigned after a case went wrong, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. A case where corrupt officials destroyed evidence and innocent people suffered. I couldn't be part of that system anymore, so I changed my name and tried to start over. "This is ridiculous," Thornfield shouted. "Even if this fairy tale were true, it doesn't change the charges against you." "Doesn't it?" Emma pulled out a folder she'd kept hidden. "Because last night, I did some investigating of my own." She approached the bench with documents that made Thornfield visibly pale. "These are financial records I obtained through legal channels, showing how funds from the community center were systematically diverted to offshore accounts. Accounts linked to shell companies owned by—" She paused dramatically. "Mrs. Eleanor Thornfield." The courtroom fell silent except for the prosecutor's sharp intake of breath. "Furthermore," Emma continued, "the real embezzlement totals nearly $200,000, not the $50,000 I'm charged with. The missing funds were used to purchase properties that were then sold to the city at inflated prices, properties that were approved by this very court." Thornfield's face had gone from red to ashen. "These allegations are baseless." "Are they?" Emma's prosecutorial instincts had fully awakened. "Because I also have recorded conversations between Mrs. Thornfield and Marcus Webb, discussing how to frame someone for the missing money. Someone who might have stumbled onto their operation." She played a brief audio clip on her phone that made Webb, sitting in the gallery, bolt for the exit. "You see, Your Honor, my crime wasn't embezzlement. My crime was being too thorough in my volunteer work. I discovered irregularities and started asking questions. Questions that threatened a very profitable scheme." The prosecutor was frantically writing notes, clearly trying to distance himself from the unfolding disaster. The forged documents, the coached witnesses, the conveniently missing public defender. It was all designed to silence me before I could expose the truth. Emma turned to address the gallery, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're witnessing isn't justice. It's a cover-up, a corrupt system trying to destroy someone who threatened their profits." Thornfield's voice cracked as he spoke. "This court is in recess. Everyone out, now." But Emma wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I motion for immediate dismissal of all charges and request that this matter be turned over to federal authorities for investigation of judicial corruption." As chaos erupted around them, Emma felt both vindicated and terrified. She'd revealed her true identity, but in doing so, she'd also painted a target on her back. The final confrontation was coming. The courtroom had been cleared except for essential personnel, but Emma noticed several FBI agents had quietly entered and positioned themselves near the exits. Word traveled fast in legal circles, and her bombshell revelations had clearly reached the right ears. Thornfield returned to the bench after a 20-minute recess, his composure forced and fragile. "Ms. Rodriguez, these wild accusations—" "Your Honor," Emma interrupted, "I'd like to call a witness." "You can't call witnesses in your own defense without prior—" "Actually, under the circumstances, I believe I can." Emma's voice carried newfound authority. "I call Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Financial Crimes Division." Thornfield's face went completely white as a professional-looking woman in her 40s stood from the gallery and approached the witness stand. "Agent Chen," Emma began, "how long has the FBI been investigating financial irregularities involving this court?" "Approximately 8 months," Chen replied calmly, "since we received an anonymous tip about suspicious property transactions." "And what did your investigation reveal?" Thornfield slammed his gavel. "This is highly irregular. This court doesn't recognize—" "Your Honor," Agent Chen interrupted politely, "this court is now under federal jurisdiction. I suggest you remain silent and contact your attorney." The power dynamic in the room shifted completely. Emma felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with years of pent-up frustration with corrupt officials. "Agent Chen, did your investigation uncover evidence of embezzlement from the community center?" "Yes. A sophisticated operation involving multiple parties, including judicial officials, community leaders, and local contractors. The total amount exceeds $400,000. Emma produced another folder. And this recording I obtained, is it admissible evidence in your investigation? Absolutely. Mrs. Thornfield's recorded confession to Marcus Webb has been authenticated by our forensics team. Thornfield stood shakily. I need to recuse myself from this case. Sir, Agent Chen said firmly, you're not going anywhere. Robert Thornfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and judicial corruption. As federal agents moved to arrest Thornfield, Emma felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. Justice was finally being served, but the cost had been revealing the identity she'd worked so hard to leave behind. The prosecutor, realizing his position, quickly approached Emma. Ms. Rodriguez, all charges against you are being dropped immediately. I want to make it clear that my office had no knowledge of this corruption. Emma studied his face carefully, the skill that had made her an exceptional prosecutor returning full force. Mr. Davidson, I believe you, but I suggest you thoroughly review any cases that came through Thornfield's court in the past 2 years. As Thornfield was led away in handcuffs, he turned to Emma with pure hatred in his eyes. You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started. Emma met his gaze steadily. I know exactly what I've started. Accountability. Agent Chen approached as the courtroom emptied. Ms. Rodriguez, or should I say, former prosecutor Emma Vasquez, we could use someone with your skills on our task force. Emma shook her head sadly. I retired from that life for good reasons, Agent Chen. This was an exception, not a return. I understand. But if you ever change your mind... As Emma gathered her belongings, Marcus Webb approached hesitantly. Emma, I'm so sorry. They threatened my family, said they'd destroy us if I didn't cooperate. Emma looked at the man who'd betrayed her, feeling more pity than anger. Marcus, corruption works by making good people believe they have no choice. Now you do. The courtroom that had been her nightmare was now empty except for the echoes of justice finally served. But Emma knew this victory came with a price. Her anonymity was gone forever. 3 weeks later, Emma sat in the same community center where her ordeal had begun. But everything had changed. The walls that once felt familiar now held different memories, some bitter, some hopeful. Patricia approached cautiously, carrying 2 cups of coffee. I wasn't sure you'd come back. Emma accepted the coffee gratefully. Neither was I. But this place means too much to just walk away. The new board wants you to consider becoming our director, Patricia said softly. After everything that's happened, people trust you. Emma gazed around the main hall where dozens of families were receiving assistance, food, legal aid, job placement help. The corruption had been exposed, the stolen funds recovered, and the center was finally fulfilling its true mission. I've been thinking about that, Emma admitted, but being director would mean staying visible, staying public. That comes with risks. Because of your past? Emma nodded. When you prosecute corrupt officials, you make enemies. I changed my identity for protection, not just from the legal system, but from people who held grudges. Through the window, she could see news vans still parked outside. The story had exploded nationally. Former prosecutor exposes judicial corruption while defending herself. Her face was on every major news outlet. But you can't hide forever, Patricia said gently. What you did in that courtroom, it inspired people. We've received donations from across the country, lawyers offering free services, other communities asking for help investigating their own suspected corruption. Emma's phone buzzed with another interview request. She'd turned down dozens already, including offers from major networks and publishing houses wanting to tell her story. You know what the ironic part is? Emma said, watching children play in the center's newly renovated playground. I became a prosecutor to fight corruption, but I gave up when the system disappointed me. Now, I've done more for justice in 3 weeks as a volunteer than I did in 3 years as a prosecutor. Agent Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression serious but respectful. Ms. Rodriguez, sorry to interrupt. Do you have a moment? Emma and Patricia stepped into the center's small office, where Chen closed the door carefully. I wanted to update you on the investigation. Thornfield's operation was bigger than we initially thought. We've uncovered connections to similar schemes in 4 other districts. Your case has opened the floodgates." "That's good news," Emma said, though she felt the weight of increased scrutiny. "It is, but it also means you're likely to be called as a witness in multiple federal cases over the next year. Your anonymity is permanently gone." Emma had expected this, but hearing it confirmed still stung. "However," Chen continued, "I have an offer. The FBI is creating a special task force focused on judicial corruption. We need someone who understands both sides, prosecution, and what it feels like to be victimized by the system. Someone the public trusts." Emma was quiet for a long moment. What would that involve? Consulting on cases, training agents, occasionally going undercover in situations like this one. You'd have federal protection and the resources to make real change. Through the office window, Emma could see Marcus Webb teaching a financial literacy class to elderly residents. He'd thrown himself into community service since the scandal broke, trying to make amends. "I need time to think," Emma said finally. "Of course. But Emma, and I hope you don't mind me using your first name, what you did took incredible courage. The legal system needs people like you." After Agent Chen left, Emma sat alone in the office, surrounded by thank you letters from families the center had helped. Some were written in shaky handwriting by elderly residents. Others were covered in children's drawings. Her old life was gone. Her anonymity was shattered. But perhaps it was time to stop running from who she really was. Word count. 600 Emma's story reminds us that justice isn't just about laws and courtrooms. It's about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage when it matters most. Sometimes the greatest victories come from standing up when everyone expects you to fall down. What would you have done in Emma's situation? Would you have revealed your identity to fight corruption, or protected yourself by staying silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. We share powerful stories of justice and resilience every week, because everyone deserves to see that truth can triumph over corruption. Until next time, remember, you're stronger than you know.